Welcome to the Tech Story Podcast, a place where we interview founders and interesting people in tech growing companies in London. I'm very excited to welcome David Evans on the show. David is the co-founder of Oii.ai, a company which leverages science and AI to optimize supply chain planning. David, thank you for being on the show.
Great
Would you like to share a bit of background about yourself and the company?
Yeah, let me do that. So my background is I spent most of my career in the corporate world, actually. Spent a long time with GSK, MSD in the pharma industry. And all of my career has been in supply chain. My educational background has got a business degree, but I've also got a master's in computer science and supply chain. And my big focus throughout that time has really been supply chain planning, and in particular supply chain planning systems. So when I was at GSK, I led what was then one of the biggest deployments of Manugistics. It's now called JDA. And I've done similar things at other companies. And I suppose the story of Oii.ai, and it's quite difficult to say, right, is that I kind of noticed that there was a real kind of issue with these planning systems. And the issue is that supply chain planning systems are completely manual in terms of the way you set them up. And setting up a supply chain planning system is actually a really complex task. So why is it critical that that is right, and why is it complex to get it right? Well, if you imagine over and above all the physical things that go on in a supply chain, I would say that the most critical success factor is planning, right? Planning determines what you make and when you make it, how you make it, what it costs you to make it, and all of the other peripheral activities which determine whether you get stuff to the customer are down to planning. So planning is critical. Planning systems essentially determine exactly what happens and when it happens, yeah? And of course, if that process is manual, then the manual configuration of the planning system essentially determines how successful that planning system is, but it also determines how effective the supply chain is. And so I saw that the manual configuration of those systems was a big issue because it drove service risk. It drove issues with inventory and waste. It drove issues with underlying costs. And so all this kind of inefficiency being really almost being the kind of the standard paradigm of supply chains. And I guess one of the interesting things of the pandemic is that everybody became aware of supply chains. They became aware of supply chains largely because of the black swan events of COVID and all the things breaking down. But actually that underlying model of these very complex networks with lots of variability, really behaving in an incorrect way, for me is being driven heavily by the way those planning systems work. So I suppose the start point for OIA was to say, there's this big issue with the current paradigm. The planning systems are driving, all this waste, all this cost, all this inefficiency. Is there a different way to do this? And then this was about 4 years ago. I had this conversation with this guy called Bob Rogers. Bob kind of reached out to me via LinkedIn. He was writing a book at the time on supply chain. No, he was writing a book on AI for the enterprise, and he wanted to do a chapter on supply chain. And he reached out to me. I'd written a few papers on various aspects of supply chain, and we kind of hit it off. And through that, I said to him, "Well, look, I've got this problem. Supply chains, are kind of inefficient. They're manually configured. It's driving lots of inefficiencies and costs. Is there something we could do?" And that was really the start point of OAI to say, okay, could we use Bob's background in advanced modelling, AI, neural networks, digital twin technology, to actually fix this particular problem. And so that was the start point, and here we are.
That's great. And I guess, where are you on this journey? Are there any supply chains that are now configured with Oii.ai?
Yeah, no, exactly. So we are. I think we're still relatively at the start point of our journey. I think Oii.ai is a disruptive technology in as much as it's a new approach. Yeah, we don't replace the planning systems, but what we do is we plug in. Yeah, so if a company's done $100 million deployment of Canaxis or OMP or O9, they're not going to replace that. But what our technology does, it plugs into that, takes the data from those systems, uses that data to kind of create this automated digital twin, which we then simulate how that supply chain is running, what risks it's driving, what costs it's generating, what waste, inventory, all of those things. And then we, through the simulations, find the correct setup. So through deploying OII, you get this understanding of, okay, our current supply chain, we would expect to see it perform like this. And actually we change it to this, we will get these benefits. So we're relatively at the start of that journey, because it's a different approach, and any new approach, any new company, you've got to get over that hump of people going, oh, we're quite comfortable spending lots and lots of money with the established companies, but do we want to do something with a new company? That said, we've done deployments with a number of companies, and I don't want to go into the details of exactly what we found, because obviously some of that they probably wouldn't want to be sharing in the public domain. But we've done deployments with 3 pharma companies now. And we've done deployments with 3 companies in the FMCG sector, and it's interesting what you see in the pharma world. We did a recent deployment with one of the very big pharmas, a pharma company that had actually done a major deployment of Canaxis, which I think is recognised as the number 1 advanced planning system right now. And what we found was as follows. Surprisingly, we found that about 60% of that company's items were kind of set up to fail from a service standpoint. And what that means is that if you took a hands-off approach with your supply chain and just let the planning systems work, and the supply chain activities follow those planning systems, 60% of the items would have had stock outs, and would have not achieved the service goals of what you'd expect, which is really high. You wouldn't expect that in the pharma world. At the same time, what we found was that the company had too much inventory in terms of their planning parameters, and not wildly too much, but definitely too much, and a cost imbalance of about 25%, i.e. could you reduce the cost of running that supply chain by 25%. The other thing we found was that, and I think this comes back to the service thing, the company actually had twice as much inventory as what you would have expected to see based on the planning parameters. And what that told us was, and this was consistent with what the organisation was seeing, was that because the systems were configured incorrectly, the people within the supply chain were actually overriding the system. So the manufacturing organisation was pushing stock into the channels because they didn't trust the planning system, and then on top of that, you chasing stuff, etc. So they had twice as much stock as what they should add, because basically they weren't really following the system. So that was very interesting for us. We saw a similar pattern in the other pharma companies, not so much on the service side, but certainly way more inventory than needed, very high discards, etc. So a real big opportunity to reduce costs and reduce waste and reduce underlying stock, which when you projected the savings, the savings within those pharma companies were at the level where you could actually move that cash and invest it in a whole, drug discovery program. So really big numbers. In the FMCG world, we've done work again with a couple of the big multinationals. We just did a really big project with food producer, their Indian division, and again a similar story. The big headline there was, we kind of expected in the FMCG world, because their margins are smaller, for the inventory to be tighter. But what we actually found was that every single item for this company had the same planning parameters. So straight out the gate, well, they're all wrong, right? That company, 38% opportunity to reduce inventory, which was huge for them, especially when margins are tight and cash is tight. And as money becomes more expensive, that becomes a much bigger thing. The other thing for them was that as we were able to reduce their inventory, 14 days, more shelf life on the shelf, because things were going through the supply chain much quicker, and therefore, getting to the customer, getting to the point where the customer could buy it with much more shelf life, which has a big impact on whether it gets sold, and also good for the customer as well. So I think we've done projects with I think about 7 companies right now, and really that's been over the last sort of 18 months since we got funding and really able to sort of start to sort of scale up. Right at this moment, we're in conversations with about 10, big names, right? Now not all of those will necessarily go, or some of them will take longer. The sales cycle takes a bit of time, but we're really starting to see that pick up, and it's like a domino effect. As you start to get, people don't want to be the first one to use a not so well-known company, but as they see other names coming on board, then they jump on board. And the big opportunity for us with this is that every planning system is manual, right? And the planning systems are doing very well, right? They don't need to kind of change the way they do stuff. They're selling out the gate, right? So all of the planning systems are manual. There's no real plans to kind of change that within those companies. So the opportunity for us to plug in and really start to fine tune those systems is huge. And there's one other thing that I kind of sort of need to touch on. There's the issue of planning systems being manual, and that's a big issue because they're manual. Even where companies spend a lot of time trying to get those parameters as good as they can, and sometimes they'll dedicate a very expert group to try and do that. It's not an exercise where you can do it very often. So what tends to happen is, even where companies are actually fairly on top of it, and the pharma company that I mentioned, did a lot of work in this space, it very quickly goes out of sync, right? Supply chains are highly dynamic, demand patterns change, variability in lead time performance changes, variability in factory reliability changes, and as those things change, they very quickly get out of sync. What our software does, it doesn't just plug in and get it right. What it does, it plugs in and then maintains it, yeah? So you get, we called it kind of turn by turn. It's a bit like, when people went from maps to, to GPS. As things change on the route, the route, changes accordingly. And it's the same with this. As things change in your supply chain, it constantly keeps it maintained. So, the good thing for us is as companies come on board, they're coming on board and then they want it, as an integrated aspect of their supply chain, constantly making sure that their parameters are fine-tuned. So we're fairly at the start point. We've really, although we've been working on it for 4 years, it's really the last 18 months where we got funding, we're able to bring people on board, to sort of scale the company, and we're really starting to see traction now. So it's exciting.
Yeah, well, it sounds like the impact is huge, and even though from an entrepreneur's perspective, or from an outside perspective, it would seem like the obvious decision for any company to use Oii to optimize the supply chain. But it's the same with us when ultimately you're a newcomer and your clients or prospective clients have a solution in place, even if it's not the best solution or it's not optimal, it's still a solution. And so selling change is always a challenge.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. It's just about getting that momentum, and then eventually everyone comes on board.
Exactly. And you want to be, being innovative is great, but you don't want to be too far ahead of the curve, right? You want to be a kind of Led Zeppelin, right, rather than a Velvet Underground. You don't want to be that kind of niche thing which, everyone gets 20 years down the line. But I think it's really picking up now. And the other thing for us is we've started to really focus on the finance story. Supply chain people are often quite comfortable holding lots of stock, and supply chain people, and I'm a supply chain person, they love kind of fixing things, right? So the firefighting aspect of supply chain makes it quite exciting. You're chasing stuff, you're putting it on lorries, you're the kind of hero that fixes stuff, yeah, as opposed to having everything kind of like really proactive and smooth. The finance people, especially in the current climate, when you say we can reduce your inventory by 30% and still maintain your service goals, they say, right, okay, we want you on board. And actually, we're speaking to a big FMCG actually on Tuesday next week at the CFO level. Because they've got a big inventory program. They've been struggling to sort of figure out how to kind of do it. You're pushing on an open door. Yeah. So all of those things I think are starting to kind of get traction, and as things as you start to hopefully get on that hockey stick, that's the exciting part of the story. Yeah.
Well, best of luck, and I'm sure you will. And so, since starting the company, what's been your favourite moment so far?
I think for me, I have enjoyed the creative aspect of it. I've always been in that world of kind of systems and business. This is great because in a small organisation like this, I'm the person that's kind of designing those system screens. I'm not building them. I'm working with the technical people who are doing the underlying sort of modelling stuff. I'm working with a really great creative team that sort of take your ideas and turn them into something which can actually be used. And that's the bit that I kind of really love. And that bit's always evolving. You're always, as you go into new clients, you start to see other use cases for your software. You start to see other kind of reports or screens that they want. And that bit's always developing. And, that's the bit that I find most exciting, sort of seeing it come to life, really.
Yeah, I think, when you're a founder and you've got the idea and then it sort of comes to life, it's always special. And sometimes it doesn't come out as you anticipated, or it becomes something beyond, that can also be positive. It's not always negative, but
That's absolutely true. I mean, we're really lucky. I mean, my co-founder Bob Rogers, who's a great guy. Bob's background, he's a Harvard physicist, so a really kind of clever guy. His career is crazy, right? I think he started off, using digital twins to model black holes and all of this sort of stuff. But on the modelling side of things, we've got a team which I think, modelling and AI, I think we beat anybody. One of our team, a lady called Madeline Udell, was Obama's AI expert during his election campaign. So it's that level of skills and capability. If I come up with an idea, I know those guys are going to come up with a
solution.
Exactly, and at the front end, our kind of UX team. You come up with a pretty idea in terms of how it looks, and it's always better. Which is kind of nice. You can claim it's your idea, but then you go,
it's better.
Yeah, so that's exciting.
Great. And so what do you wish you'd known before starting the company?
Well, I think the tough thing with starting a company is you're kind of a hustler, right? And the sales part of it, the design bit, the supply chain bit, even the systems bit, it was always a strong card. The sales bit, I've never been a salesperson, right? I think it would have been great for us to get a salesperson on board sooner. But actually, the journey we've been on, which is always, we always talk about, has been very sort of synergistic, and the synchronicity has been great. We brought a sales guy on board about a year and a half ago, and it didn't quite work. We recruited them. We didn't quite know what would make a good sales guy, and so we kind of forced it. And it didn't quite work. We've now, actually a sales guy reached out to us, saw a podcast that one of our founder did in the US, got excited and said, I really want to be a part of this. And even came on board, just said, look, I'll do it for kind of shares. So I suppose the learning for me would be to kind of relax a little bit and not kind of force things. We forced things with the sales. We weren't sales guys. We got some sales traction, but we wanted to force it. We brought a sales guy, but it didn't quite work. Sometimes sort of allowing things to happen, knowing what you need to do, but not kind of forcing it would probably be the learning. It would have been great if we did learn to be sales guys, but we would never be sales guys, right? It's not in our wheelhouse.
Interesting philosophy. I mean, I guess from my perspective, I had some sales experience before starting the company, and but I also feel that if I didn't put myself in that uncomfortable position of needing to sell, then the product wouldn't sell itself. So how do you sort of balance that?
No, it's exactly that, and we weren't unsuccessful actually. I mean, we closed, with like that big pharma that I mentioned, without any sales guy on board. So it's not impossible, right? But I think you also have to kind of recognise, your strengths and your weaknesses, and there was definitely a need for us to kind of get somebody, sales guy, sooner, I think. But yeah, it
needs to be the right one and the right team.
It's exactly that. The recruitment bit is kind of crucial, I think, in a small organisation. In a big organisation, you can afford to get that wrong. In a small organisation where you're kind of burning, investor money, you can't. And with hindsight, we'd have probably waited until we had the 100% right person. We knew it wasn't 100% right. We thought, okay, let's go with it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great lesson. So yeah, for any prospective founders listening, don't hire at all costs unless it's the right fit.
I think exactly that.
Great. And so you're starting to see some traction and climb that hockey stick. What's sort of the vision for the company for the next 3-5 years?
I think the vision is this. I think we need to keep selling the product, and I think that's really starting to happen now. I think we need to keep developing the product. I think in terms of supply chain design and configuration, automating that. I don't think there's anybody out there that does what we do, and so that's exciting. I think the opportunity for us is how to kind of develop that part of it, whilst at the same time keeping an eye on the planning part of the story, because one of the interesting things about our software is that under the hood, it is essentially a planning system. It mimics a planning system in order that it can configure a planning system. And it mimics a planning system in a very interesting way. Most planning systems are essentially a one-stop hit, right? You do one forecast, you do one configuration of the network, you do one, configuration of all the different planning parameters, and there's your plan. And if it's wrong, you're out of kilter. Ours is essentially a stochastic planning system because it runs thousands of simulations of how it should be, and therefore it kind of gives you a range. Now, one of the opportunities for us is to say, okay, do we go into that planning space? Now, we wouldn't want to go in there now because, we're too small. But as we start to grow, our planning engine is, I believe, quite revolutionary. And lots, I saw a podcast yesterday actually from SAP who were talking about stochastic planning and how they wanted to start looking at it. Well, we're already there with that. So that's an opportunity. So I think it's continue to sell, it's continue to develop the product that we've got, and it's continuing to keep an eye on, where we can potentially, branch out and go into other areas.
It's very exciting, and I guess it's one of those stories where once you do gather more data and more market share, then ultimately you can start to replace the incumbent.
Exactly, and maybe that's partnerships, maybe it's, we step into the space and somebody comes and says, okay, we need to buy these people before they take our lunch away. Or, maybe it's, we do actually go in there and, disrupt that part of the market. So it's exciting.
Yeah, well, very exciting, and best of luck.
Yeah.
And as a busy founder, I imagine you must come across quite a few contracts or legal documents. What are maybe the key ones, and what can you share about them?
The key ones for us thus far have been, I suppose, two. NDAs, obviously, we have to be, as you start to have conversations with organisations, we don't want, them to kind of take our stuff, but at the same time, where we're taking data, etc., from organisations, then obviously they want to be able to trust the fact that, they can trust us with their data. So NDAs has been a big one. We've got mutual NDAs, and we've spent quite a bit with lawyers to make sure that those things are all tidied up. I think contracts with our customers, which again need to be written in a certain way. Contracts in terms of initial engagements, but then also ongoing discussions, and then I suppose finally contracts to cover shares, etc. So we as an organisation, and I'm sure you see this with a lot of new companies, we pay people both in terms of normal sort of salaries, but we've also paid a lot of people in terms of and that's a big endorsement for us, that people are prepared to come on board and do stuff for shares. But then of course you've got to make sure all of those things are covered off. So we've we've spent a bit of money with lawyers along the way, but I think that's a good investment for us to make sure those things are done right and they're watertight.
Yeah, a common pattern on the show is that we do find that it's important to invest in legal early on.
Yeah.
Because if you don't invest today, then you might lose IP. You might, if employees do leave, then they might be able to create competitors. And it's ultimately a problem that can be solved later down the line, or it might not be able to be, you might not be able to solve it, but the cost of solving it will just be so much bigger than any legal investment that you do today.
Yes.
So start early with your legals is the key insight.
Definitely.
Great. So I'm conscious I've taken a lot of your time, so I'm going to ask you the closing question we ask all our guests. What's your favorite tech product? It can be software, hardware, it can even be your platform, but what's your favorite tech product?
Well, obviously my favorite tech product is Oii.ai and our product Opti. But I suppose leaving that aside, I love all the Apple stuff and what have you. But the reality is our business could not have got to where it is without Zoom. We're in San Francisco, we're in the UK, we're in other parts of kind of Europe. We could not have got to where we got to without Zoom. And in fact, 10 years ago, this business couldn't have got off the ground. So it frustrates me from time to time, but I think that has been a key enabler for us.
That's fantastic story, and we also have half our team in Spain. So without Zoom, equally, we wouldn't have been able to have the setup that we've got today. And yeah, great product, and it enables communication. So
Definitely.
well, thank you very much,
Stuff.
David, for being on the show, and best of luck growing Oii.ai.
Thanks very much. Really enjoyed it.
Okay.
Cheers.